a noise. Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter, and I'm here with Celeste Gardner from Global Minded. We're delighted that you could join us today. And for those of you who are watching on the YouTube channel, thank you so much for tuning in on this really important topic. We are launching right now a week called Back to School in Times Like No Other, because these are times of multiple pandemics. It's COVID, it's all kinds of racial revealings and unrest. And these things have been going on for a long time, but it's more clear now that everyone's mostly in their homes, what's really going on, because people have the time and space to really absorb some of these things. So we're glad that you could join us today. And we, for those of you who don't know, we are devoted to creating a capable and diverse talent pipeline. We do that in a number of different ways, but every year we have an annual conference. And this was taken virtually this year for about a third of the sessions that we had slated. So we're glad you could join us for that. We work with different colleges, historically Black colleges, minority serving institutions, and Hispanic serving institutions and tribal colleges. And we also have Inclusive Leader Awards every year across 14 different industry sectors. So we have high hopes. We'll see all of you and that you can meet these amazing women in person next year in June in Denver, and that we're all vaccinated. And you can meet a lot of our first gen to college students as well. So it is my pleasure to introduce both of our speakers today. Rebecca Mieliwocki is the 2012 National Teacher of the Year from California, and she's the author of Adventures in Teacher Leadership, Pathways, Strategies, and Inspiration for Every Teacher. And that's a book published by ASCD in 2019. She's currently a teacher on special assignment. Rebecca coordinates secondary teacher induction and professional development for Burbank Unified School District. A veteran middle school English teacher, Rebecca is also a kid at heart who believes there's nothing more important for students than to have the most dedicated, enthusiastic, passionate educators possible. That's why she's global-minded. She also fervently believes that the crusade to transform education will happen at the hands of teacher leaders from all across the nation. She has traveled the world advocating for the country's 3.2 million public school teachers, has appeared on CNN, CBS, PBS, and The Ellen Show, and she blogs for Ed Week and the Education Post. So we're delighted to have her. And I will briefly introduce her colleague, who is the original connection that I have to this wonderful work. Katherine Bassett is CEO and co-founder of Tall Poppy. And we met a few years ago in Washington, D.C. at a really wonderful event. I think at the time was on entrepreneurship, but you'll have to remind me later, Katherine, if that's what it was. She runs a consultancy firm providing leadership development and other services to nonprofit organizations, associations, state education agencies, connecting educators with opportunities in policy, research, and advocacy. A sample project depicting that would be working with the Center for Curriculum Redesign to engage educators in the study investigating the incorporation of non-cognitive and other skills into instruction. Clients include the JFK Library Foundation, Center for Curriculum Redesign, the Utah State Board of Education, and Albany State University. And we've been really delighted the last few years to have Katherine join us in person, and we're delighted you're both here to be with us virtually today. Welcome.
Thank you, it's an honor.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having us. You ready for us to jump in? Okay, so Katherine and I are gonna go ahead and share our screen with you so that you can take a look at the slides that we've prepared to share with you today. You just do a little bit more clicking and then we should be good to go. Katherine, are you there?
I'm here.
Awesome. Why don't you go ahead and introduce, or I guess we've already been introduced, so we can kind of just jump in and talk about what our plan is for today. So today, we would like to sort of leap off the pages of the book that Katherine and I wrote together with Joseph Fothery about how to plot your own teacher leadership journey. And the way we chose to do that was by sharing the stories of everyday teachers like you and like Katherine and like I, who wanted to do more than simply teach kids. We had a passion and some energy to do a lot more than that, to try to make a wonderful future for students and for teachers. But right now we find ourselves in the middle of something very historic and very unusual. It's a time of upheaval and a time of really exciting innovation. It's brought with it a lot of emotions. Some of those are stress and anxiety and worry and excitement. What we'd like to do today is talk to you about how you might take your journey from being a classroom teacher or some kind of teaching practitioner and move into a space where you could do more and engage in some leadership around the issues that are facing us right this moment. So I want to begin by talking about my own genesis of my leadership journey, and it begins with cheese cubes, believe it or not. I was faculty chair at the high school that I taught at in 1996. And one of the crazy ideas that I had was that whenever we would have a faculty meeting, that I would pick a color theme for all of the snacks that were provided at this table for 100 teachers to nosh on when faculty meeting starts. Because if you get a bunch of teachers in a room, the way to keep them awake and engaged is to make sure you keep their tummies happy. And so the year that I did that, October was of course orange. And I remember that there was not a whole lot of orange food that I could serve. And there was just sort of this mountain of cheddar cheese cubes that I had been cutting the night before and sticking little toothpicks into so that no one would touch the actual cheese. And it's that moment that I sort of realized, like, girl, you're out of control. You care way too much about this. And the fact that you're spending your time thinking of ways to make things nice or better for teachers is just a sign of your DNA. And you're going to have to answer to that call the rest of your life. So that was over 20 years ago and nothing has changed. But I'm proud to say it began with cheese cubes. Katherine, how did your teacher leadership journey start?
I was the first library media specialist in my district. It was a small district that had never had a library before. And so really starting that library media program was completely up to me. And I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I also had a lot of successes. And I found myself doing a lot of whole school programming as the librarian. And I think that that was the genesis of my leadership. And I also, at the same time, was very involved in my union and became my union's vice president, the chair of the grievance committee, which is a really exciting and positive job. If you've never been the chair of the grievance committee, you might want to give that a go. And again, you know, just a leadership opportunity that I didn't expect or anticipate, and really became interested in leadership in general. And then when I moved to ETS and started doing research, I started to research why there weren't real opportunities for teachers to serve as leaders without leaving their classroom within this structure of this thing that we call school. And that led to the development of the teacher leader model standards and lots of other things that Rebecca and I will talk about as we go forward.
Mm-hmm. I think Katherine brings up something really important, which is, why is there this space, this vacuum, where there aren't any teachers who are practicing classroom teachers who are also engaged in leadership? And my whole career, it's year 25 for me now, my whole career, it feels like a game of tag where I'm running away from some formal position that keeps trying to grab me, and instead trying to stay loose and moving around different areas where I can be useful and my talents and energies can actually contribute without having to move into a principalship or having to become, you know, an instructional coach officially. So I found little rebellious ways to move into that space Katherine talked about and try to be effective there. And but it hasn't come without sacrifice and challenges, because it does several times feel like it's either or. You're either an official, formal, traditional titled teacher leader, or you're a classroom teacher, and it's not really that common to find somebody that's in that middle space. But today's workshop is about asking you to step into that middle place. And the reason why is because 2020, I saw this, I turned this into this picture for us today, but at a task force I'm part of that met last week, the organizer and coordinator said this funny sentence. He said, 2020, read the room. Enough already. And I thought that was hilarious. I think there'd been an earthquake that day in LA, and it was just like one more thing that was going to be the straw that broke the camel's back. There has been so much upheaval. Carol alluded to that. We're in the middle of a global health pandemic. We have a crisis around racial justice in the nation that's actually a global crisis. We know we have friends on the other side of the oceans who feel the injustice that we feel. We have a presidential election coming up. I mean, there really is just a whole bunch of things colliding at once and coming at us fast. So I think as a human on planet Earth, it's such a stressful, upsetting time. It's hard to find joy and silver linings. You have to really work for them. But as a professional educator and teacher leader, our minds have been just swirling with the implications of all of these things on our work as teachers of children and teachers of adults. And we have had to try to come up with solutions for the 6 dozen challenges that arrive each day. And I've been on my district's reopening committee, and our official first day was yesterday, and things are going well so far. But being on that committee for about 15 minutes made me realize that for every one thing you solve, it creates about 17 new challenges that you have to work out. And none of them are easy, and none of them make anyone happy. And it's been gut-wrenching labor. But there is a lot going on right now, and yet that means there's a tremendous opportunity. Katherine, do you want to speak to a little bit about what 2020 has been like for you so far?
I would echo a lot of the things that you said. In the work that I do as a consultant, a teacher leader consultant, there has been a tremendous amount of upheaval as teachers, administrators, districts, parents, students all try to adjust to the new format of learning that we're experiencing. And now that we're preparing to go back into a new school year, it's even more chaotic because it seems to change in some instances day by day. Will we be in person? Will we be virtual? And it's very difficult for teachers and school leaders to be able to plan for what learning will look like when it's constantly changing. It's a moving target, if you will. And so as a family that has lost a family member to the coronavirus, I know the seriousness of the medical situation that we face. And I sometimes become frustrated and angry with people who don't understand the seriousness and say, let's just get on with it already. But we really need to take into account the safety of all of the people involved as we make decisions about what learning is going to look like as we move into the rest of 2020 and then into 2021.
Mm-hmm. What this brings up for Katherine and I is sort of a reimagining of what teacher leadership is right now. Katherine, talk to us a little bit about teacher leadership in the time, in the now time, now, after, forever.
So I think that what we're experiencing right now has opened up a lot of doors for teacher leaders in new ways. And so if you do want to go to the next slide, that's perfectly okay. When we developed the teacher leader model standards, one of the activities that I led the consortium in was unpacking the population of great awesome teachers and then teacher leaders. But I also asked them to unpack if we had teacher leadership, and this was back in 2009 through 2011, and so we really didn't at that time. But if we had teacher leadership, what would formal teacher leadership look like as opposed to informal teacher leadership? And if you look on the side of the slide that says informal teacher leaders, some of the things that are listed here are actually moving now onto the other side of the slide. And so we see roles for teacher leaders in areas that we didn't see them pre-COVID. So we see roles for teacher leaders in things like, how does teacher leadership shift in terms of the people who used to be the teacher leaders, which typically were your more experienced teachers, your teachers with 15 or more years of experience, suddenly becoming the learners because they don't know how the technology works. And so now your first and second year teachers may be your teacher leaders. So new doors are opening for teacher leaders who aren't quite ready to have been called teacher leaders, but are being called upon to be those teacher leaders as they're helping their more experienced colleagues, more experienced in terms of pedagogical practice, more experienced in terms of content knowledge, but much, much less experienced in terms of technological knowledge, to learn how to work technology for teaching and learning. We're also seeing more opportunities for teacher leaders to step in to advocacy roles. So when we think about what's happening with teaching race, social justice, bias awareness in our schools, there weren't traditionally formal roles for those kinds of teachers or teacher leaders. There were in some places. I have a very dear friend who's been a race and equity coach for about 15 years in her school district in Minnesota, but that's rare, right? And so now we're seeing more formal roles for teacher leaders to step in and be those race and equity coaches, those race and equity teacher leaders. So these tumultuous and turbulent times have created new doors opening for new roles for teacher leadership. Rebecca, I don't know if I answered your question.
Totally, yeah. I, like you, witnessed a department chair be unable to lead a Zoom department meeting yesterday because they did not have appropriate technology and they did not know how to navigate it. So a teacher that's relatively new, maybe 5 years in, and one that I have been pestering to become department chair for that entire time, did have to step up and kind of take over. And it was so natural for her and it was really easy. And it just hopefully was a spotlight for her, an aha for her to go, maybe I can do this. Maybe I'm the right person for right now for this job. And so you're right, there are these moments and opportunities that people who heretofore would have been too afraid to take a risk and step in suddenly are. Another example I can think of is so many teachers are in conversation with their districts or have been left out of conversations with their districts about safe ways to come back to school and teach kids. And because of their own personal circumstances and their own desire to be safe and do right by their profession, they're finding that they cannot stay silent. They have to write a blog. They have to tweet about this. They have to present at a school board meeting. And it does raise their profile and moves them into the space of being a voice that could be listened to and followed and consulted by the people who do make decisions in districts. So this is an incredibly stressful and alternately exhilarating time as we see systems sort of crack and break and light floods in to show us what's been broken for a long time. And hopefully it's shaking loose some people who feel some newfound level of skill or ability or comfort in being able to jump in and have a say about how we rebuild this. So it's an exciting time. Katherine, it's really important for the two of us to share that there's a lot of research out there about the need and the value and the impact of teacher leadership. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So when I began doing the work of building the teacher leader model standards, there was not a tremendous amount of research or experience out there. And if you look at some of the dates on some of this research, Kitty Bowles and Vivian Troen from 1994, Lieberman from 1987, Smith from 1999. This is research that's older. And yet there has continued to be tremendously important teacher leader research continuing into the 2000s and into the 2020s. And some of that research has been done by people like Jennifer York Barr, who continues to research teacher leadership and is currently researching boundary spanning. And so boundary spanning is something that I find absolutely fascinating. When you think about teacher leadership, you have to think about boundaries. So if you don't understand the structure of leadership in your school, as a teacher leader, you are going to make terrible mistakes that in some case are irretrievable. So you have to understand the leadership organization within your school, and you have to be able to be someone who's able to navigate multiple boundaries between teachers and administrators, between teachers and parents, between parents and administrators, between teachers, administrators, and community. And of course, between all of those entities and students. And so how does somebody gain the skills to be able to navigate all of those boundaries? The research that Jennifer York-Barr is doing is critical in helping us to understand that. I also think about research done by Mark Smiley at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the research that he's done around what not to do when we are looking for people to serve as teacher leaders. And he says the days of relying on the anoint and appoint model of teacher leadership are over. And so what does that mean? It's like when your principal comes to your door and says, you know what, you are such a great, awesome teacher. You would be a fabulous student teaching coordinator. And so I'm going to introduce you to your new student teacher, Shazam, with no training, with no information, with no background. Here you are. You're magically a student teaching coordinator. That has to stop. Just as we had to learn skills when we were learning how to become awesome teachers, we have to learn skills when we learn how to become teacher leaders. And those skills include things like boundary spanning, like negotiating, like some of the things that you'll see on upcoming slides. Teacher leadership, any kind of leadership, is complex. And in order to do it effectively, there are things that we have to learn and things that we have to be able to do.
That is awesome. Katherine, when you talked about boundary spanning, I immediately thought of a conversation I had Friday with a high school principal. So my title is TOSA, Teacher on Special Assignment. So I've been plucked out of my 7th grade English classroom to work on new teacher induction and secondary PD. As part of that role, where I'm like not in the classroom, not out of the classroom, I had to work with a team of teachers to build a professional development module that teachers would all get this week and begin to work their way through. So my job was to kind of coach that team to build this module that then we handed off to administrators to work with their teams to get through and to learn from. But on Friday, a principal reached out to me and said, what's the best way to do that? Because I trust that you understand what teachers need when it comes to kind of consuming a virtual PD, and I don't want to put my foot wrong at such an important time. So we walked through some suggestions that I had for him about how to move through those modules with a purpose, to set out some goals at the start, to empower the department chairs to ask and answer some questions, and how to coordinate the pulling of questions from teachers. Everything from how do I get core novels distributed to where does all the quiz data go in Google Classroom, like really diverse sets of questions. But the fact that that principal reached out to a teacher leader and was willing to take a risk and say, help me. And they met a teacher leader who so wants principals to thrive and succeed and to be the best leaders of teachers possible is a really unique situation. And I'm glad I'm in that, but that's a place where you could go with your leadership, is to be somebody an administrator can rely on and can respect and can trust. And at the same time can hear tough things as well. When we were done talking, I was able to share with Tom a couple of the little gripes that were shared with staff that I work with, little adjustments that they could make to make things run a little more smoothly. He was open to hearing it. He made those changes, and it works really well for all parties when you can kind of span that boundary and work right on those edges for all parties. And then to the part about retention and recruitment, like part of the reason teaching can be so unfulfilling for young people is because they do want to have power in the classroom and control over what they do, but they also want opportunities to collaborate and see the real-time impacts of that collaboration. And they want to have a say over more things that happen in schools than just in their classroom or in their department. And so operating as a teacher leader brought me satisfaction and fulfillment, sometimes extra money, not always. I'm getting better at asking for extra money for the work that I do because it's labor that's valuable and can be compensated for. But it does a lot to help fulfill you in the profession, whether you're my age, 51, or whether you're a 23-year-old just starting out. So teacher leadership is a compelling space that we hope you'll consider entering. The model standards.
So these are the domains of the teacher leader model standards, and I always call them the first iteration domains, because I would like to see the teacher leader model standards be revised, but that takes funding, which we don't have yet. So these are the first iteration domains. And if you take a quick look through them, I'm not going to read them to you, but I'll tell you essentially what the guts of them are. So domain 1 focuses on adult learning and leadership. If you're going to be a teacher leader, you have to understand how adults learn. And the word for how adults learn is andragogy, just as the word for how children learn is pedagogy. If you do not understand how adults learn, you will not be successful as a teacher leader. So this is the critical domain. This is the foundational domain. The other domains are sort of pathways into teacher leadership. So domain 2 focuses on the role of the teacher leader as a researcher, as someone who collects, disseminates, conducts, and shares research with colleagues. Domain 3 is promoting professional learning for continuous improvement. So how do we as teacher leaders design and deliver that professional learning to help other teachers continually grow in their craft? Domain 4 is facilitating improvements in instruction and student learning. So how do we help teachers understand what they need to do in order to grow and strengthen their practice? Domain 5 is assessment. How do we use assessment data to help teachers understand where they need to grow and strengthen their practice, and where their students need to grow and strengthen in their learning? Domain 6, how do we work as teacher leaders to be effective partners with our families and our communities, all of our families and our communities? And domain 7 is that advocacy role. How do we advocate not only for our students, but also for our profession? So these are the 7 domains of the teacher leader model standards. And I'd like you to think about them and think about, where do you fall right now as a teacher leader within these domains? As I think about my career, when I was in my library, which is where I started as an educator, my teacher leadership was primarily in domains 2 and 6, always in domain 1. When I went to ETS and worked as an assessment specialist, it was in domain 5 and also in domain 1. When I went to Pearson, it was in domain 2 as well as domain 1. At Enstoy, it was in many of these domains, but lots of work in 2 and 7 and 1. And in my role now, I find myself a lot of times in domain 3 as well as 5 and 7 and 1. So we don't expect someone to be an expert in every one of these domains. Where your teacher leadership lives at any given moment in time can shift and change depending on what you're doing. What Rebecca's doing right now puts her in domain 3, but she wasn't in domain 3 when she was in her own classroom necessarily, right? So what you're doing, what's being asked of you, determines where you're going to live as a teacher leader. And looking at the standards domains helps you to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. One of the moments that has happened since March, when we went, when our schools in Burbank closed and we went online and were virtual learning and trying to build up that infrastructure where families could be connected to teachers in schools, there was a moment where my leadership moved into domain 6 because I was following various parent groups on Facebook. I am part of those groups in other worlds and other networks, and yet I work with teachers and administrators and district leadership daily. And what I was quickly understanding was there was not an outcry, but a deep request from families to standardize when teachers would be online, or what the assignments might look like, or could there be checklists with each set of weekly assignments so that parents could partner better with kids and help kids be more successful. They needed some standardization, even though they totally understood that we were in an emergency. We were doing the best we could, that teachers had been given directives to follow that they were following, but it resulted in things being a little too loose for families to be that successful or feel that they were being successful. So acting in that space where I could be a go-between between what I was hearing parents ask for of the district and working with teachers with subtle suggestions about how you might design your weekly output and when you could have things due and how you might attach that checklist, we started to see those changes move into lots of different classrooms, and we could almost hear the sigh of relief from families saying, thank you. Thank you for making it a little bit easier for us to do this well, because they do want their kids to succeed. But what Katherine brings up, which is so true, is depending on what you're working on in your career as a teacher in the classroom, or if you're kind of spanning all those other boundaries, is that you're going to be doing work in all of the domains. And no matter where you're working, if you understand how adults learn best, and you really understand how kids learn best and how to teach well, you've got the skill and talent to be rather successful in any and all of those zones. And I think when you look at a career and that you can come in and out of those strands, it's exciting. It's pretty compelling, and you don't worry that you're not doing it right, because that's where I was always at, imposter syndrome. I'm not doing it right. When they find out what I'm doing, I'm going to get fired. And it turns out that what I was doing was actually just moving in and out of these domains. And until Katherine showed me the domains and I became familiar with them, I was a pretty stressed out person, but now I'm a really happy person. All right. So in this moment where we are experiencing so many challenges to the way we've always done things, we've noticed, Katherine and I have seen it with our eyes and done it ourselves, all the different ways that teachers can lead through this crisis or through this moment of change. Many teachers, one of the organizations Katherine and I belongs to is called Enstoy, and we surveyed our membership, and almost 90, maybe it was between 70 and 80% of the teachers surveyed said that they had been asked their opinions about reopening plans, or they were sitting on their own district or regional committees for reopening. And so whether or not you've been formally, officially asked to voice how you feel about safe reopening plans or virtual schooling, or whether you personally feel compelled to make your voice heard, one of the ways that you can lead right now is by working with your administrators and your leaders to let them know what are safe practices, what is doable, what's not doable, and help to guide that decision making. You can also, and you your bestie that you talk to all day long about everything. You have the department that you belong to. You have your grade level peers that you belong to. You have your school faculty that you're friends with, and then you're connected to your district and maybe your national content organization. Whatever those networks are, I know they are so activated right now. They are lit up bright red because all of you are talking right now, and that is the smartest thing to do. We surveyed the teachers in our district about what was the one single most helpful thing from March to June that got you through. 98% said a single peer that I could collaborate with and not be afraid to make mistakes in front of. And so we want you to jump into that space. If you're used to collaborating with a peer, grab another person and make it a triad, or find somebody that you think is not connecting and see if they would like to collaborate around lesson planning, unit design, technical tools for doing live or asynchronous instruction. You will find that that is the thing that is saving a lot of teachers right now, and we need you in that space, so don't be afraid. You can also, if your school has not developed any kind of advisory committee about how you can go forward in this moment, ask your principal or your building leaders if you could start one, and ask them to come on board with you and together work with admin and teachers about the ways that your school can tackle this crisis in ways that are super supportive for the families of the children at your school and of all the things that make your school and school culture great. Be part of an advisory team, build it, and you'll have a lot of joiners, I'm sure. The last two issues that around where you could lead right now have more to do with social and emotional awareness for kids and for teachers. First, we had a teacher friend in Minnesota casually put on Facebook that she was not doing okay yesterday. She is a teacher leader. She's engaged in all kinds of activism around education. And for her to honestly put in such a public way that she was not doing okay means there's probably about 3 dozen more who are too afraid to say that. And so however you can lend emotional support, even if you have to calendar weekly check-ins with teachers that have been quiet or seem strong, but you know better because you're smart, make sure that you reach out to them in ways small or big and let them know you're here, you're thinking about them, you care, and when necessary, offer links to supportive places where they can have people to talk with or get help from. But you can be a huge emotional support to every person in education right now. So don't forget that. And also don't be afraid to ask for help yourself. There are a lot of people out there that care about you and want you to succeed and be okay too. And it's okay to ask for help. And then finally, the fifth way that we've seen teachers jumping into the fray is right now the messaging around education has done kind of a 180, and I almost have whiplash. You know, in March and April, we were the nation's heroes. There was no amount of money you could pay us that would ever be enough. And parents were willing, you know, to pay us millions to take their children back. But now when the uncomfortable conversations are about whether or not it's safe to go back, and should our teachers be on the front lines with kids and move into that space where we don't have enough information right now to make really sound choices. People have a lot to say about that. And what they have to say is not often kind. And so if you felt so inclined to write a letter to the editor or to blog for one of the education journals or one of the newspapers, or to stand up at a board meeting and share what you feel is the right way forward, we've seen a lot of that activism and advocacy for our profession happen during this crisis. These are just 5 of the many ways we're watching teachers leap into action right now. And I think, Katherine, I'm looking at our schedule. I'm wondering if now might be a good time to have our attendees share anything they'd like about maybe the model standards or about the moment or about projects or goals or challenges they're facing. Do you think that would be a good idea if we opened it up to some chat right now?
Out of time, yes.
Okay.
Sure, and everybody can just unmute, right? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And we're happy to hear anything.
What are some of the things that concern you as you get ready to start the new year, or maybe you've already started the new year?
Don't be afraid. We don't bite.
Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How are you today? Thank you so much for all this great information. But I think one of the things, like starting the new year, what you just mentioned is the coping, dealing with our students and how they're going to cope with coming back into a building if we go back in. And teachers as well, their anxiety levels. I talk to teachers all over New Jersey, and they're not getting any sleep because their district says we're going in, we're not going in, we're half day, we're not half day. So any suggestions on just with the students, but also with our fellow colleagues as well?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's Miss Monica, correct?
Yes,
And
it is.
It's so nice to have you here with us. I think that one thing that we really need to keep top of mind is transparency. When we're dealing with our colleagues, when we're dealing with our students, when we're dealing with our communities. And I think that perhaps that is one of the things that is causing so much distress right now, is that there is a lack of transparency, not because people want to be untransparent, but because they honestly don't know. You know, they don't know, how are we going to be going back to school in New Jersey? It does seem to change from day to day, or at least from week to week. And so I think that being transparent about how we're feeling and being supportive of one another during this time is very important and very helpful. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I think that transparency is critical.
Mhm. Hi, Monica. This is Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi. What I've watched teachers do that seemed to kind of take the temperature down immediately was to, number one, recognize the stress or the anxiety that the person has verbalized. Two, offer a really small bite-sized next step. You know, so sort of take the big thing and move it down to a very manageable, let's do this next, just this next. I've watched teachers do that with kids who are kind of spinning out because it's all too much for them. So recognize what's happening in the moment, turn it into a bite-sized, manageable next step with a lot of TLC and flexibility about what that looks like. So like with a teacher who is overloaded by the technology and is shutting down, kind of saying this is a lot. Why don't we just figure out how we're going to take attendance? Because I think I have a solve for that. Can we work on that for 10 minutes? And that typically keeps them at the table for a couple minutes more. And then with kids, if it's an assignment that's been put out through Google Classroom or even live instruction, and you just notice that a kid is in a space where they're not able to take this in and they're not going to be able to move forward, is moving into a space where you are safely closer to that kid and offering sort of a first step and a check back. And I think just the hard part is giving everybody so much, this word is sort of cheesy now, but like giving people a lot of grace and latitude. And in that space, being extra empathetic. None of us are experts. None of us have done this before. We can't get it wrong because we don't even know what right looks like yet. And in that world where mistakes are going to be super valuable for us to learn from, let's feel comfortable knowing we can make those in front of each other. I'm going to make mistakes in front of you, students, and I'm definitely not going to know enough to teach another colleague. So we are literally going to have to just join hands and jump in together and try to keep a sense of humor about it. But definite empathy, TLC, small bites, and going slow might be a way for you with your teachers.
And Rebecca, I just want to acknowledge for both of you that no matter what field you're in right now, everybody is so tightly wound because everything is new for all these different people, whether they're in the healthcare profession, they're teachers, they're all dealing with so many things. And I just love your suggestion that we're all human and we need to be able to be honest and realistic about our humanity. And if we're able to do that, then I think people can be empathetic and be compassionate and realize that if teachers can do that, then they can do that with students who are feeling, you know, really overwhelmed. And a lot of them, the pressure that their parents are managing in this whole time frame too.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Isaac, did you have a question? We saw you unmuted.
Absolutely. Isaac Thompson, Nashville, Tennessee, here at Fisk University. You know, I guess my comment was more of a comment than a question. Was with what's going on now. You know, it really, I think, makes the communication and teamwork with parents so much more crucial for teachers now, and maybe especially at younger ages, monitoring their time and the focus on screen. That puts pressure on everybody concerned. The children's ability to focus, the parents' choice to stay at home to go to work, the teachers having to deal with the gap that probably grew from some children to other children from March till now, going back to school. I mean, and who do you teach to at that point? Do you teach to those who have been preparing and doing some other things and engaging, or to the ones who have not done much of anything? If there was a gap in March, it's 3 times the size now. And so I think that the need for the teamwork piece is even more important right now as we go through this thing. How do you suggest engaging all entities so that they're working together, in the best interest of the environment to teach and the environment to learn?
Mm-hmm.
That's a long way
of
asking that question. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I can speak to that, Isaac, and that is a brilliant question. Right now, my district, it was going to be hybrid model until California had an outbreak of cases and the counts went so high, we had to shift to all online. And what we noticed was that there are changes to the way we're teaching kids right now that allow us the time and energy to do the kinds of things we always hoped and wished and tried to do when we were in live classrooms with kids. For example, through Google Classroom, I'm able to differentiate the assignments that I push out to the class without anybody knowing that one kid's getting something and another kid's getting a different thing. It all is called the same thing. In the classroom live, kids are pretty smart. They know when a handout looks slightly different, or when they, go into groups and kids have even one question different, that becomes an object of conversation. Through Google Classroom, that's held completely confidentially. Secondly, I have live synchronous instruction in the morning, but in the afternoon, I have sort of creative time, lab time, office hours. And in those hours, I'm able to hold one-on-ones or small groups for kids who need that kind of either acceleration because they're already there, or because there was a gap that occurred in March to June to now that I need to help ameliorate and help bring that kid up to speed in ways that make him feel seen or attended to, or feel confident about the learning. I'm also able to communicate using the tech tools with parents to let them know exactly what's going on. And I could only do that because there's time baked into our week with online instruction that's specifically devoted to parent support and parent communication. So what I'm loving about now is I'm able to help and differentiate in ways that don't exhaust me, because I run a club at lunch, and in the passing period, I have to get myself to the restroom and back. I have more energy and time and space to be for my students who I was always supposed to be, but never quite measured up. So you're right, parent communication is massively important. Using the tech tools and designing it so that every kid gets what they need, and knowing that it is your responsibility to do that, is what's going to help, I think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the clock. We have about 11 minutes left. Why don't we go ahead and say, anybody else with questions or needs, go ahead and throw those in the chat, and we'll leave a couple minutes at the end.
And actually put them in the Q&A, right, Celeste?
In the Q&A.
Chat is, I didn't realize in this format is just for like the presenters. Is that right, Celeste? So put your questions in the Q&A.
Yes, that's correct.
In the Q&A. Katherine, should we spend some time on the shifts?
I think just a few minutes. What I'd like to do is ask Carol if she can get the PowerPoint out to the people who are participating in this session. And what we've given you are 3 slides on shifts that we make when we move from terrific teacher to teacher leader. And these come directly out of the research that we did when we were developing the teacher leader standard. And one set of those, so there are 3 overarching shifts. First of all, we're shifting from teaching students to shifting adults. And we've already talked about that huge shift from pedagogy to andragogy. Another shift is that we're not talking about me anymore. It's not my classroom, my instruction, my students, my professional learning. It's the classroom, the students, the parents, the instruction, the professional learning of my peers. So these are big overarching shifts. We're also not instructing, we're more facilitating. And that's a shift that should be happening in our classroom with our students anyway, but it definitely has to happen when we're working with adults. In addition to those three overarching shifts, we have three buckets of shifts. And what you're looking at right now is a bucket of instructional leadership shifts. And I'll just pick one. I'm going to pick the third one down. Great teachers stay abreast of research. They know what research is coming out, they read it, they're aware of it. But teacher leaders are engaged in producing and formulating that research. They're still staying abreast, they're not leaving that behind, they're taking that with them, but they're also producing the research. And so an activity that you can do with your team or with your school is to print these three sets of shifts, and we'll show you the other two, on three different colored cards, and put the cards on a table and have everybody take one card, and then go find somebody with the same color card that they have, so that you have two people looking at instructional shifts together, two people looking at advocacy shifts together, two people looking at policy shifts together, and talking about those shifts. Then you have them go find somebody with a different color card. So you have an instructional leadership person teaching an advocacy leadership person about a shift in advocacy and instruction, and then go find somebody with third color card. So looking at policy leadership shifts, great teachers know who their policymakers are. Teacher leaders are engaging with those policymakers. They're making appointments, they're having conversations. They're saying, this is what the policy that you're enacting or about to enact looks like on the ground in my classroom. And this is why you need to think about it differently. And then the same thing for advocacy. For advocacy, great teachers, of course, advocate for students. So do teacher leaders. Teacher leaders also advocate actively for the profession. And so this is a great activity that you can do with your colleagues, with your peers, with your administrators, with your whole school, as you are working to understand what happens as we move from great teacher to teacher leader.
I had a girlfriend call me the other day. Her name's Gemma. She works in the Valley, and she's a reading specialist for a private school. And she called me and she said, there's just something missing anymore. I've been doing this for 10 years. I love teaching kids to read, but it has become a little bit of the same thing, same old, every day the same. And not that I don't love when a kid grasps finally that strength. She said, I love nothing more than talking with other people who do this work about the research and about what works, and helping new reading specialists get excited about it. And I said, it sounds like it's time for you to move from just a teacher who teaches in class to presenting at conferences to other teachers. And she said, do you think I could? I was like, you have 10 years of experience. If there's anybody that could, it should be you. So I think what the shifts help remind us is that it is okay to have this sort of passion inside about something really granular in education, whether it's in any of those buckets. And if you're super passionate about it, it's okay to activate that passion and start doing work in that area that doesn't take you from the classroom, but instead it just sort of deepens that pathway that you have loved being on in new and interesting ways. So I hope Gemma takes the advice and looks up a couple of conferences to present at, because I have a feeling that will add some satisfaction to her work, bring her back to work excited, and will motivate her because she will have learned new things too that make her work better on a daily basis. So the shifts help all of us. We already chatted a little bit, so I'm going to pass through this because we had our chat a little sooner. Earlier, we talked about skill sets that are really important for teacher leaders, and Katherine mentioned andragogy, which is if you want to be the best possible leader of teachers, You have to understand how adults like to learn. Some examples are that they want their expertise and wisdom valued and validated. So they don't want you as a teacher of teachers or somebody who's trying to lead them to always start at square one. Instead, find out what they all know and begin there and build what you have to do from that moment. That requires tremendous knowledge and expertise on your part, but you've got to have it. The other thing adults really need is they need to see several successful trials of something before they will be convinced to even try what it is you want them to do. So they need to hear how it worked in one school. They need to hear how you succeeded or failed with it. They need to see materials from a third or fourth area that has worked on this issue, like PBIS or Universal Design for Learning. They will not just swallow something whole the first time because you want them to. So you need to know these little tidbits about andragogy if you really want to be helpful and kind of move the adults to a better place. Katherine, what's a skill set that you think is super helpful for teacher leaders from this pyramid?
From this pyramid, I think the communication is critical, and communication is not one way. So communication that is meaningful, that is two-way communication. And again, it goes along with that boundary spanning. So communication between peers, communication between educators in the classroom and administration, at the building level, at the district level, at the state level, at the federal level. Communication with the community, with parents. Again, that transparency. Being open, being honest, and being unafraid to say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question, but let me find it out. That's part of communication.
As we think about wrapping up, our encouragement and our call to action for you is that you are not afraid. It is very stressful, scary time right now in a lot of ways, but don't let that be the thing that holds you back from doing a project you always wanted to do. I launched a project with administrators last week that I was convinced it's not the right time for. We'll wait another year when we're out of this crisis. And my boss said, maybe it's the perfect time. Maybe right now it's exactly what principals need. And I thought, why not look at it that way? If it crashes and burns, so what? This is a historic year. I'm not betting on anything, so why not try? So don't be afraid. Do go forward with a project or an idea that you have. Be willing to take that risk. There will be people that sign on and want to help do what it is you'd like to do. We have a list of do's and don'ts here. Katherine, is there a favorite that you have or some advice you want to give before they launch on their leadership journey?
And the not quitting too soon is one that's really important to me. When you start something or try something new for the first time, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to run into rocky pathways. And oftentimes that can encourage you to give it up. Don't. When you run into a problem, when you run into an issue, that's usually a good sign because it means that something is working. It just might not be working the way that you want it to. And so don't give up on it. Find a way to solve that and find a way to solve it with others, with partners, not by yourself. So not quitting too soon is very important. I think in education, we have a tendency to jump from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing far too quickly. And we don't give one strategy, one policy enough time to be successful. And we need to stop doing that.
We do. I think we've come up on our hour. If there are any questions in the chat, Carol, that you want us to address before we say goodbye?
You know what, let's check in the Q&A because that is where things are. Celeste, do you want to see, for some reason I'm not able to access the Q&A here. Okay, looks like there's not open questions in there, but I hope everyone will email, and I'm excited because I see Marianne there, who's my sorority sister from college. Hi, Marianne. She's an amazing teacher. Good to see you.
Hi, Carol.
I'm excited you're here. Yeah. So, well, you all did a wonderful job. And I just want to share, one of the things that over the Christmas holidays, I broke my wrist, and I was just messing around one day because my husband went to visit his mother. And I started researching across all the areas, numbers of women and people of color in leadership. And one thing I realized is in K-12, there are 72% women, but in terms of, principals, and so not just teacher leaders, but principals, there were 1,984 women and 13,798 men. And I was like, wow, look at all the women in this field. And I just think what you guys are doing is not only lifting up, incredible teacher leaders, but you're also opening up a vista for people who may want to continue beyond the teacher leader. But if they don't have this opportunity, how will they ever see themselves, running a school or a district or anything else either? So I just think it's so valuable from so many different perspectives. And, Global Minded, we're all about inclusive leadership. And I think you have so many ways for everybody to tap into these things, no matter if they're teaching in a tiny rural town or they're in an urban district. Like, these things are so transferable, to any population. So thank you so much, both of you. And we, Celeste, can we make sure that their emails are there in the chat as well? And then we are going to send you the PowerPoint. So many of you are, in situations where you're sharing, and some of you are doing pod teaching. It's like there's so many models of things going on out there right now. But I know that Katherine and Rebecca would be really happy for you to liberally share these things, and then encourage people to watch this on YouTube so that they can benefit more fully from the wisdom that both of these women have. So thank you all so much, and thank you all for joining us today. And we know there's a lot of things going on right now, but I think this is one of those things where you can be sometimes overwhelmed or stressed, and then feel like you have a way forward, and you know how to do that, calming down for yourself, and you know how to do that for others. So thank you all so much. I feel like the timing of this was really perfect today, and we hope to see everybody next June or July with vaccinations in Denver. And have an amazing fall. And I just want to say one more thing to Rebecca and Katherine is we would love to profile you all and some of your teacher leaders for our newsletter, because we're doing a whole back to school sequence between now and the middle of September. So keep that in mind too, and we can coordinate through Celeste to make that happen. So,
Carol, for everything that you're doing. You're doing amazing work, and I greatly appreciate it.
well, we're a team. We're just a team of a ton of people like you guys. That's all we are. So thank you all so much, and we'll see you in the newsletter, and then maybe some other sessions in the next month or two.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Again, guys. Bye.